Ngina Kenyatta, legendary First Lady of Kenya who married the country's first president and gave birth to the fourth president of the same country, is a woman with a history full of mystery and scandal.
Former First Lady Mama Ngina Kenyatta's
Mama Ngina Kenyatta.
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 Mama Ngina.
Mama Ngina Kenyatta.
Mama Ngina.
Especially related to her massive secret business empire that she has built since her husband Mzee Jomo Kenyatta was alive. At one point, Ngina Kenyatta was Africa's richest woman. This is the fascinating story of a shy, beautiful country girl born into Kikuyu royalty
na kufanya kazi pamoja mkiwa ndugu na dada,
who married her school principal Jomo Kenyatta when she was just 18 years old and ended up as the Kenyan business person most accused by American media of killing thousands of elephants in the alleged Ivory trade of the 1970s that we discuss up ahead. This two-sided story opens you up to the mystery of Mama Ngina's success and scandals, as well as allegations that her family has been accused of editing history of Kenya to fix the bad parts in the Kenyatta family legacy.
Nawashukuru sana. Mimi sijafikiria ati kuna watu wanajua bahari tunatoka.
This story carries many claims and revelations that could offend political sensibilities, especially concerning whether the Kenyatta family dealt Ivory and before that even lied about participating in the Forest Liberation War by the Land Defense Forces, also known as the Mau Mau. Ngina was born on June 24, 1933. Mama Ngina was the daughter of a paramount chief, a man of great wealth and power called Mohoho wa Gadesha. Before the colonial British came to Kenya, Ngina's dad was the Kikuyu equivalent of a king, and theirs was among the uppermost families in Kikuyu socio-economic hierarchy back then. That's of course until the colonial government took most of their powers.
Mama Ngina, how old are you? Watoto nazaliwa isiwa na kufa wewe unabaki.
The status and wealth of Chief Mohoho, even in the deep of colonial occupation, is demonstrated by his ability to even educate his daughter Ngina in the early 1950s up to the point where the girl caught Jomo Kenyatta's eye. At the elite Koinange Training College, Senior Chief Mohoho wa Gadesha inherited the crown after his father Chief Mohoho wa Kenya got killed by the white British colonizers when Chief Kenya said they would have to take his land over his own dead body way back in the early 1900s. The legend goes that Chief Mohoho wa Kenya, Ngina's grandfather, was then cruelly tied up with a rope and the British soldiers dragged him tied to a speeding horse until he died. Back in those days, when Ngina was a teenager in the late 1940s, there were very few African children who got to attend any kind of schooling in Kiambu, where Ngina was born. Luckily for young Ngina, even with most of her family's political power stripped away by the Imperial British occupiers, Ngina was still among those born with a silver spoon in her mouth by any African standards back then. Her father Mohoho wa Gadesha owned a lot of land in the entire Kiambu district, thousands of livestock and servants that she couldn't even count.
Hiyo upendo wa mzee, alikuwa anapenda mambo ya Mungu, alikuwa anapenda karibu iwe kanisa iwe karibu na mji.
One thing about the early senior Kikuyu chiefs of the 1930s and 40s is that most of these families preferred to collaborate with the colonizers in fear of having their land and livestock confiscated from them and ending up being pushed into the villages to live with their subjects, the working class commoners of the Kikuyu nation. Yet, above all this, many among the Kikuyu royalty wished that the British could pack and leave so they can reclaim their places at the top of society amongst the forest tribes of Mount Kenya. Although publicly they denounced the Mau Mau freedom fighters fighting in the bush, and even some among them, such as Chief Waroyo Waitote, ending up assassinated by the same Mau Mau, these pre-colonial chiefs such as Mohoho wa Gadesha, Ngina's dad, and his compatriots such as Karuri wa Gakure, Kinyanjui wa Gadirimu, Angaine Ntoitiria, and even Musa Nyanduse of the faraway tribe of the Abagusi, among others, all would manage to retain their family wealth, prestige, and pedigree even after Kenya had gained independence and the British left in 1963. Their own sons and daughters, many of whom were sent to study overseas in British universities, would end up holding the steering wheel of the Kenyan economy after independence, and many of them are still holding this wheel to date. At the point where they meet and get married, the differences in the realities of life For the young African princess Ngina Muhoho and Mr. Jomo Kenyatta the principal were like day and night. Jomo Kenyatta had been born into a common peasant Kikuyu family, and although poverty was in common among his people back then, his father had nothing compared to Ngina's father. Kenyatta became an orphan at an early age when his poor father died, and his whole childhood life was beset with trials and tribulations. All of Jomo Kenyatta's success and reputation as a Kikuyu politician and scholar came to him later in life after he had traveled far away from his home village.
Yule ambaye ananiangalia kuja kama jambo kwa wananchi. Huyo ni Mama Ngina.
For example, his opportunity to travel to England for the first time in 1929 was out of sheer luck, and even his traveling expenses were raised through Harambee crowdfunding by the Kikuyu Central Association KCA. How he would come to meet Ngina Muhoho and end up marrying her was through the following very interesting short story. When Jomo Kenyatta came back to Kenya from Britain in 1946, he had already achieved celebrity status among his people in the Kikuyu populations. Just like his fellow African leaders in the Kenya Africa Union Party, KAU, upon his return, Kenyatta believed it possible to use dialogue to convince the colonial Mzungus to leave Kenya to the Kenyans. These methods of political diplomacy were also preferred by the traditional Kikuyu chiefs like Ngina's father Chief Muhoho wa Gadesha, who being the elite top 1% in the House of Mombi, had a much deeper understanding of political science and negotiations than the common landowning citizens. On the other side, the Mau Mau freedom fighters were nothing like Kenyatta or Chief Muhoho in their politics against the British. The Mau Mau saw the situation differently because their top leadership had previously been drafted to fight for Great Britain in the Second World War, where they had witnessed firsthand how white men fought and died just like any other black man would. The pre-colonial Kikuyu rulers such as Ngina's dad Muhoho and other aforementioned senior chiefs did not send their sons away to die fighting for the British in Burma and other battlefronts for the world wars, but instead they opted to send their children abroad to get degrees from Oxford, Cambridge and Sheffield. The have-nots, like Jomo Kenyatta's brother known as Kongo, did not have the option to avoid being conscripted into the First and Second World Wars, and many of them died in those trenches far, far away. Jomo Kenyatta himself, despite his lower birth like his younger brother Kongo, intentionally avoided being drafted in both World War I and World War II by simply running and hiding away in places where they couldn't find him.
Wakati ule wa zamani najua wale mimi nilikuwa nakaa hapa Masaini miaka 50 iliyopita.
Those Embu, Meru and Kikuyu young men who were forced to go to war for the British and survived came back home from the war to find that the colonial government had taken away more of the land and subjugated the people further, which drove them into the forest to fight for liberation. The Mau Mau declared war on the colonial British and their sympathizers, top among those being the politicians and the African ruling chiefs who collaborated. And so it happened that about 4 years before marrying his wife Ngina, Jomo Kenyatta was on the verge of getting married to a different young woman from another royal African family right there in the Kiambu district area. This other girl was the daughter of the great Chief Koinange wa Mbiu, and Jomo Kenyatta's fame, notoriety and influence among the Kikuyu helped him make friends with one of Chief Koinange's sons known as Peter. Peter Mbiu Koinange was the principal at the Koinange Independent Teachers College, which is a school that catered to African learners from well-to-do Kikuyu families that couldn't get into the colonial-controlled senior schools, mostly because they were not willing to adapt some of the radical Christian ways that the British were forcing on the common Kikuyu peasants. Peter Koinange appointed Jomo Kenyatta as deputy principal at the Koinange Independent College when Jomo Kenyatta landed back in Kenya in 1946 because Kenyatta did not have any work. Therefore, when it was time for Peter Koinange to go continue his education in England, like many young men in his social class would do back then, he promoted Jomo Kenyatta to be the new school principal back in Kenya. However, just as Peter Mbiu had departed for England, Jomo Kenyatta, whose political fame continued to spread as an agitator for freedom and land, secured the blessing of Senior Chief Koinange, Peter's father, to marry one of Peter's sisters by the name of Grace Wanjiku. The marriage between Kenyatta and Grace Wanjiku would not last, as the young woman unfortunately died at childbirth while giving birth to her only daughter, Jenny McKenna. This was Jomo Kenyatta's third marriage. Ngina Muhoho first saw Jomo Kenyatta when she was a young student at the Koinange Teachers Training College. Kenyatta was already the school principal and almost 50 years old. Young Ngina Muhoho was among the very first women who attended the Teachers Training College. Some historical records say that Jomo Kenyatta's marriage to Ngina came as a gift from her senior chief father Muhoho Wagadesha, who in his political scheming and plotting wanted to invest in future leaders of what he saw as the coming Republic of Kenya. There is, however, another hypothesis from historians that Jomo Kenyatta himself sent a formal request to the senior chief due to his proximity to Ngina in the Koinange Teachers College. After Chief Muhoho endorsed Jomo Kenyatta, the opposition politician, to marry his daughter Ngina, the colonial government, which had taken all the power from the Kikuyu and Meru chiefs and rendered them ceremonial, caught wind of this arrangement and removed Ngina's father from the position of chief. In Muhoho's place, one of his brothers was made the new senior chief by the British colonizers. Jomo Kenyatta would nevertheless marry Ngina in the year 1951 when the young woman was only 18 years old and she left school to start her new life as Kenyatta's wife. At the point of their wedding, Jomo Kenyatta's children from his very first marriage, named Peter and Margaret, were already older than his bride Ngina. Further, Kenyatta had another child born in his marriage to a British woman known as Edna Clark back in England. 1 year after Ngina had gotten married to the most famous Kikuyu politician, Kenyatta was arrested and transported to Maralal after the assassination of one of the collaborating Kikuyu chiefs, Waroyo Waitote, who had been fatally shot in broad daylight by the Mau Mau soldiers. Kenyatta was tried and imprisoned in Kapenguria in what the British colonial government declared to be an extended state of emergency. In the period of years when Jomo Kenyatta was detained in Lodwar and Maralal, his wife Ngina would stay with him for long periods of time, at first visiting, then later she would come to stay with him, since Jomo Kenyatta, unlike other political detainees over there back then, had negotiated the privilege to have his wife come stay with him due to his age and health, and also his connections with the British officials. Others believed the British thought Mzee Kenyatta was going to die in prison and saw no harm in allowing him some time with his young family. At the same year that Jomo Kenyatta gets arrested, Ngina gave birth to her firstborn child, a girl who grew up to be Christina Wamboi Pratt, and later a key figure in the Kenyatta family empire. Later claims from sources around the family itself claiming that Ngina was arrested by the British and detained with the Kapenguria Sikhs have been hotly refuted by many Kenyan historians. Also, many alternative historical records, especially books not to be found in Kenyan school curriculum, seem to tell a different story. Eventually, Ngina's first son, Uhuru Muigai, the other family president, was conceived when Ngina was staying with Mzee Kenyatta at his house arrest prison home in Maralal. When Jomo Kenyatta was sworn in as the first president of the Republic, Ngina Kenyatta became the first lady, Mama Ngina Kenyatta.
1 year after becoming independent, Kenya now assumes Republican status within the Commonwealth. Jomo Kenyatta arrived at Jamhuri Park, Nairobi, to take the oath as president.
By 1963, even though Jomo Kenyatta was a relatively poor politician without any land and properties, his wife Ngina had inherited great wealth of land and livestock, which made Kenyatta himself to look like a rich man as he was taking over the leadership of Kenya. Foreign newspaper reports and international rumors began associating Kenya's first lady Ngina Kenyatta with ivory poaching in the early 1970s. For many years, Ngina Kenyatta had appeared in public behind her husband, the President Jomo Kenyatta, always dressed elegantly with the appearance of being shy and family-oriented. She would never comment on politics or leadership in the entire time Jomo Kenyatta was president. Behind the curtains though, Ngina was busy building a deep relationship with Mzee Kenyatta's eldest daughter from his first marriage, who was called Margaret Wambui. Margaret was born in 1928, 5 years before Ngina. Together with Margaret and her brother Peter Muigai, who was an MP in Juja and also an assistant minister, Ngina was said to start an elephant hunting syndicate and allegedly selling the elephant tusks as ivory to buyers in China for millions of money every month. The claims back then said that over 20,000 elephants were killed annually by Mama Ngina's poachers. In 1975, a British conservation magazine called New Scientist published a scandalous news article exposing how Kenyan government vehicles and even trained government officials were being used to kill and transport elephant and rhinoceros ivory. The investigations by the New Scientist put First Lady Kenyatta and and her husband's daughter Margaret at the heart of the alleged poaching operation. Similar allegations were published on the New York Times in America. Following the scandalous expose, the Kenyan Minister for Wildlife and Tourism was forced to declare it illegal for anyone to hunt game in the country's vast national reserves, something that had been legal and rich people were doing it for free for a long time. Despite the ban on poaching, the Kenyatta family was said to continue their ivory business away from the eye of the media and with the assistance of state machinery. There are individual politicians in Kenya, for example J.M. Kariuki, whose mysterious and controversial deaths were said to be associated with getting mixed up in the secret ivory exporting business of the Kenyattas. When the Jomo Kenyatta administration finally decided to respond to the damning reports about Mama Ngina on the New Scientist and the New York Times newspapers, it accepted that yes, Margaret Kenyatta had sold thousands of tons of elephant ivory to buyers in China, but it also added that Margaret, then the mayor of Nairobi, had been given a license from government to poach those elephants long before the minister had in 1975 placed a ban on hunting them.
Kwa niaba yangu na my family.
Other sources in and out of Kenya suggest that Margaret and First Lady Mama Ngina both continued with their ivory exporting business even long after Mzee Jomo Kenyatta's death in August 1978. In top secret files declassified by the American CIA in the year 2002, First Lady Mama Ngina Kenyatta is explicitly mentioned as having made large sums of money from selling the ivory to China, and together with the serious amounts of land she had accumulated before and after her husband's death, she is then identified in these papers as the new kingpin of the Kenyatta family after Mzee Kenyatta's death. From 1970 until when Daniel Moi took over as the new president of Kenya, Ngina Kenyatta was listed as the richest woman in Africa on the Forbes magazine billionaires list. Jomo Kenyatta's death brought uncertainty and fear to Mama Ngina and her young children, fearing that they would lose much of their wealth and land if the new administration did not help them register the lands under the Kenyatta family name. Ngina was concerned that Moi, who was a trusted friend to the Kenyatta family, would lose in the power struggle that followed Kenyatta's passing on and therefore leave her exposed to her many enemies. To avert that possible disaster, Mama Ngina would do everything within her power to ensure that Vice President Daniel Moi became president to protect her and her children as well as the family business. Without saying or showing it, Ngina understood the jealousy and hatred of those very close to power that felt she and her family did not deserve the wealth they had accumulated over the years. After the new president had been sworn in, Mama Ngina remained as the de facto First Lady of Kenya because the new president was a divorcee who had separated from his wife Lena years earlier in 1974 and now lived alone with his children at State House. Throughout the transition period that followed Mzee Kenyatta's death, Mama Ngina retreated from the public eye to focus on business and family, and she would rarely be seen again in public once Moi had taken over the country's leadership. Once in office, the second president Daniel Moi made sure to protect the Kenyatta family legacy, even if that meant whitewashing some of the more scandalous parts of the family history and past business activities.
Bila kujali ringi yao ya kisiasa, bila kujali ringi yao ya kisiasa.
All the truth about their massive accumulation of public land, the destruction of wildlife and the betrayal of the Mau Mau was conveniently forgotten by mainstream history books under Moi. However, over the years, as Kenyan media and newer generations of historians continued to dig and ask more questions, First Lady Mama Ngina Kenyatta saw it fit to come back into the public spotlight as a move to save her legacy and protect her family wealth. When Uhuru Kenyatta first attempted to be elected president of Kenya in his early 40s, he did not succeed, but on the second attempt, he was elected in the year 2013. The election of the second Kenyatta to the presidency in 2013 was a chance for Mama Ngina to set her house in order and ensure that whatever was swept under the carpet of history during the Moi era does not come back to bite her family. The wealth, power and presence of the Kenyatta family was rejuvenated under the reign of President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta between 2013 and 2022. In that period of her son Uhuru's presidency, Mama Ngina was seen in the news more times than she had been seen since the burial of Mzee Jomo Kenyatta in the late 1970s. When the Pandora Papers investigations exposed her overseas assets to the global public, it was discovered that Ngina had bequeathed much of her money and assets to her son Uhuru Kenyatta in 2017, when Uhuru was just about to be elected again as the president of Kenya. Mama Ngina's other children, Anna Nyokafi and Mohoho, the last born, are all very wealthy, very private people. Eventually, when she approached the age of 90 years, Mama Ngina would take what was seen as her final step in polishing her political legacy. She visited a renowned Mau Mau freedom fighter, a woman known as Field Marshal Muthoni wa Kirima, and Ngina shaved Muthoni's long locks of hair in full glare of the media cameras. In this bizarre event, Mama Ngina Kenyatta made a claim that her and Muthoni had been arrested by colonial authorities way back in the day, and they were both detained at the Kamiti prison for the crime of fighting for Kenya's independence. And then Mama Ngina said she was shaving Muthoni's hair as a symbol of their long-running friendship since they were in prison. There are those who shook their heads in disbelief on seeing this story on TV, but many Kenyans today stand in awe and wonder of Mama Ngina Kenyatta, who turns 92 years old in June 2026.